People should be allowed to dress as they please as long as it's not negatively affecting other people. And this isn't. Ben Shapiro, you might know him from his remix of the song WAP. It's very good. You should look it up on YouTube. Also known from his work at the Daily Wire and his very interesting articles on Palestinians. If you want to go look that up, they're about 20 years old, but somewhat revealing. He decided that he was going to come up with some legislation on how people should present themselves in public. And the conclusion he comes to is that local communities should be able to ban men wearing traditional female clothing in public. Now, to be clear, Ben Shapiro is somebody who has claimed on multiple occasions to care a lot about personal liberties, about individual liberty, individualism as a concept, somebody who cares a lot about letting people, like, live their own lives outside of the long arm of the big government. And he is saying that it is the government's job to legislate men not wearing, quote unquote, traditional female clothing in public. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Should wearing dresses and skirts be illegal for men in public? If so, should wearing pants for women be illegal in public? Well, pants not so much, because there is a female version of pants that is nearly indistinguishable in many cases from male pants. But men wearing traditional female clothing in public, I think that there's a case that local communities should be able to stop that. Sure, I mean, we have local laws about being naked or indecent exposure, or at least we used to.
Is the rest of the clip just silence? Just
have I seen Kyle Dunnigan's Fresh Pres of DC, where you're featured as Biden's butler known as Beneford the Butler? I have not seen this, actually.
Okay, I don't know why it was. Why did they make the clip so long? This clipping was terrible by Jason Campbell. He usually does a good job. What are you doing, Jason? What are you doing? What a wild assertion. A wild assertion. So the thing that's interesting about this is just, number one, how arbitrary it is. The reason we have laws about indecent exposure is because exposing that type of sexuality to children, right, could, like, for example, a streaker or somebody like trying to expose themselves to children can have a negative effect on the child when it comes to their development, both physically, depending on how far this pervert goes, and mentally. It can have an effect on them mentally that can be very hurtful and start engaging them in sexual activity in a much younger age than they should be, just not only just for their mental state, but also just their physical state, where their body is just not prepared to do any of those activities. That's why we have laws against indecent exposure. That, and of course, people's sensibilities and a bunch of other reasons. But that's like the core reason, is because we don't want to expose that to small children, and we want to protect other people's, sensibilities about not wanting to see that type of private parts of themselves. Now, that is the reason. A few of the reasons. There's a bunch of reasons why we don't allow people to just walk around naked in public. Probably good health reasons too. You don't want to get ticks and you don't want to freeze to death. But putting that aside for a moment, comparing that to wearing traditionally female clothing, I guess dress and skirts, there is no negative effect on children from seeing that. There's no negative effect on really anyone else, unless that just somewhat displeases you, or if somewhat offends you that you have to see somebody in female clothing. But if that's the reason, because there's no benefit for the child, there's no health reason that this shouldn't be happening, if it's just because it offends you, that's the reason, then we have to not only ban clothing that is traditionally female, or anything that's offensive. So are we going to be talking about political messages that are offensive, that could be offensive to people's sensibilities? What if I went down south with a pro gun control t-shirt, or go into certain communities and have a rainbow on it to represent the LGBTQ plus community, right? Should we ban that? Is that not allowed? What about, for example, and this is a constitutional issue that the ACLU used to fight about, allowing Klan rallies. Now, look, I don't like the Ku Klux Klan, but there's a reason why the ACLU fought for their ability to wear the robes and do these marches, and it's because it's their First Amendment right. So are we going to start saying that anybody like that is banned? And this becomes a constitutional issue, not just for them, which nobody really cares if the Klan gets screwed, me included, unless that affects everybody else, where it screws with everybody else's rights. So becomes like a First Amendment issue about how you're allowed to express yourself and how you're allowed to show yourself in public. Why is it that local communities should be even legislating this in the first place? What's the positive effect of telling men that they're not allowed to do this, right? People should be allowed to dress as they please as long as it's not negatively affecting other people. And this isn't. It's not that they're dressing up like a cop and they're like misinforming people and pretending, to be a police officer, impersonating a cop and hurting people. It's not that they're exposing themselves to children. It's just they're wearing traditionally female clothing. And also, where are we going to draw this line for what is traditionally female clothing? He says skirts and dresses, but what about high heels? Are high heels going to be considered traditionally female clothing? Because high heel also used to be worn by archers in combat. So, I mean, traditionally female in what way? As in we now consider them female clothing, or that in history it's been used primarily by women? And would we also turn this into the other way where women cannot wear traditionally male clothing? What would that be? Like they can't wear like work boots. They can't wear like a cowboy. Like what is it going to be that we regulate their bodies? Is this just going to be something that applies to men, that only men are going to be affected by what is now going to be discrimination upon what they can wear based upon their gender? How is that going to work? And where are we really going to draw this line? Because traditionally female clothing, right? Traditionally female clothing. When we talk about skirts, what about kilts? I mean, I don't want to get into too much of the specifics, but this, putting all of the classification issues aside, this is much, that's a lot of muches, much more overreach from the government. I would expect Ben Shapiro to openly advocate for. I think, he should have immediately registered that people are going to call him a hypocrite for saying, hey, I believe in personal liberty, but also government should be able to ban you from wearing pieces of clothing because it's too feminine. And now this just sounds like something a theocratic maniac would say. That sounds like, this might actually get under Ben Shapiro's skin, considering his views of the Iranian regime. But that sounds like something the mullahs in Iran would say when talking about how the morality police can dictate what women can and can't wear when it comes to hijabs. Are we now going to hear Ben Shapiro say it would be fine, for example, a conservative Muslim community in the United States to say all women in our community must wear hijabs? That those local communities could do that? They could say that, no, that personal clothing on you is not an item of self-expression. No, this is not a First Amendment issue. This is an issue of God, and you have to wear the hijab. Would he be comfortable with that? Is he fine with that happening in Iran, with women being forced to wear hijabs against their wishes in many instances? Not only in Iran, but in other societies as well. I do not think that if we took this value and we put it in other situations where it currently does exist in the world, he would stand by it. The regimes in the world that legislate and dictate these types of specifics about people's clothing, they're usually far-reaching authoritarian governments, types of governments that Ben Shapiro, avowedly, according to him, does not like, does not stand with, is against, according to him, when it comes to his personal liberties. He does not want to see that in the United States. But here he is. Now, because it's trans people, and that's what it feels like. It's now just because it's trans people, we need to ban men from wearing dresses and men from wearing skirts. Who cares? I mean, this is something that soldiers used to do on base. They would dress up in drag in order to entertain themselves and their buddies. Is that something that has to be banned too? We can't tell soldiers aren't allowed to do that. That's too offensive. It's just so ridiculous, man. It's so silly. That assumes that a constant politicized belief exists for these talking heads. They believe whatever is convenient at the time. It's just so silly. Did he not at all think about the implications of what he was saying? So silly.